To today's session of the Business and Trade Select Committee as we pursue our inquiry into industrial policy. Today we are focusing in on industrial policy around defence and steel. The purpose of today's session, for which we're incredibly grateful to you ministers for sharing some time, is so that the committee can bring together its submission to the MOD's consultation on defence industrial strategy and to the steel strategy that has been launched by the Department for Business and Trade. So we've taken lots of evidence already. Thank you very much for coming before us today to answer some questions which have arisen. Maria Eagle, perhaps I could just start with you. In the light of today's budget, we would just like to get to the bottom of the numbers to the best that we can. I realise there's still a spending review ahead. So page 20, table 2.1 in the Green Book today suggests that it's basically a £10.6 billion increase in defence spending. So we assume that that is defence spending as defined under the NATO criteria. But could you give us any indications of how much of that 10.6 billion is actually going to be MOD spending, in contrast perhaps to some of the money which may go to agencies like our intelligence agencies, which may not be within your department? Have you got a sense of what the breakdown is?
As you remember, when the Prime Minister made the announcement on the 2.5%, he then said that he was going to include some of the monies that go to the intelligence agencies that relate to defence in that figure. And he said that would take it up to 2.6%. So the majority of it is MOD spending, although, as you say, Chair, not precisely all. I think it's over 90%. Is what I recall. Yep. But I haven't got the updated figures on the basis of the additional, because obviously with the new OBR report, the numbers move slightly, and so it's changed slightly. But it's the vast majority of it, Chair. And
that's roughly 90% of the 10.6 billion.
It's 90% of the total.
Okay, which is 10.6. Okay. The second question, which we would like to know the answer to then, is do you have at this stage any sense of what fraction of that money is actually going on equipment?
I don't have the updated figure from today, but the breakdowns, I don't have a percentage share.
That's something within the bounds of the possible you might be able to supply us with in due course?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That would be incredibly helpful. Thank you. The question which we're then interested in is the relationship between that defence spending and economic growth. So it's quite hard to work out what the fiscal multiplier is of this spending. There's obviously quite a lot of literature about this knocking around at the moment. The best that we can surmise, though, is that the OBR says that the economic impact of defence spending, it peaks in 25-26 with the extra 2.9 billion. The GDP boost, according to the OBR, in that year is about 1.62 billion. So that implies a fiscal multiplier of about 0.55. That's actually much lower than the figure that is out there in the economic literature, which is more like 0.9 to over 1. So we're just quite interested in whether you get into this in the department. Do you think about the economic impact? And if you do, have you got a sense of what the positive outcome from that defence spending will be on economic growth and, of course, crucially on jobs? There
is an extra 2.2 billion today, as well as the 2.9 billion, making 5 billion this year. But as you know, Chair, some of the programmes that this money is spent on are very long term. And so in that sense, they take some time to, the economic effect of a particular spend takes some time to come through. We do have a department, an economic department, that will be crunching these numbers. Yeah. And again, it's something that I could certainly get right to the committee about.
That would be incredibly useful, thank you. And then the only other numbers question that we've got at this stage is around the export finance number. So the Chancellor today talked about 2 billion extra for UK export finance. Is that the same 2 billion that the Prime Minister talked about in relationship to Ukraine a couple of weeks ago, or is that new and additional money?
I think it's new and additional, but if I'm wrong, I will let the committee know.
Perfect. Okay, that would be really helpful. Great. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Matt Weston.
Thanks, Chair. Obviously, the situation in Ukraine has changed the view, really, in terms of conflict and how it is fought in the modern era, and a need to be more agile. What other lessons do you think you've learned from the conflict in Ukraine?
I do think that it's not only about agility, it's about speed of procurement. So there's no doubt about the fact that if one looks at drones, for example, the iteration in terms of innovation is a much faster, within weeks rather than months, years. But also, our procurement processes have to be much faster because they want the kit that they need as soon as possible. And one of the things that has been quite striking as we've done procurement for Ukraine is that we've been able to do it much faster than we do it for ourselves. And there are lessons to learn here. And some of the ways that we've achieved that, so it's the same people who do this, who do the procurement for us. So it's not that there's a lack of skills or ability in our procurement arrangements. It's just what we're willing to, the process we're willing to go through. And so we've been much more pragmatic. We've prioritised much more clearly and empowered people at a lower level of the procurement process in order to enable them to speed it up. We obviously don't have the same regulatory requirements that we ourselves face in kit that we're sending to Ukraine, although we've tried to follow the usual kind of regulatory process, but we're a bit more pragmatic about it. And the risk appetite and safety appetite that one is willing to put up with has been different with Ukraine. That's enabled us to speed up. So yes, innovation and also speed and the clarity of what we're trying to get. One of the problems we've had in the past in MOD is we've changed requirements a lot after they've been contracted for. We don't do that with Ukraine. We know ahead what it is they want and then we get it. We don't then change our minds halfway through about what we want and start adding bells and whistles or changing requirements. And that has resulted in much faster procurement. And obviously with something like drones, it needs to be faster still.
Just on that, Minister, give us a flavour. It's not obviously our area of expertise, but procurement, I think, under governments of all hues, has struggled. You mentioned that you have been able to speed up the process. It's the same people. You talked about delegation downwards, of course. But if you were talking about a process taking like 100% of the time in the UK, what would it be in percentage terms versus that 100 that you're managing to achieve for Ukraine?
I mean, some of our... it depends on what you're procuring.
Understand.
But years less. Years less. We can do it in half the time. I mean, sometimes...
Less than half the time.
If you're purchasing off the shelf, it's different to if you're ordering an exquisite kind of platform. And in the past, we've tended to order exquisite platforms rather than purchase off the shelf because we've wanted to have very high-end kit for our own soldiers. And it's a time when, and armed forces, a time when we've not been in a war situation. That's been more important than getting something that works out to the front line. And so it's impossible to give you a precise figure in respect to that because it does depend on what it is that you're buying or purchasing. But we can do it much, much faster.
Parallels with the pandemic. We could be learning from these and
actually not a bad analogy.
Simplifying the process. Okay. So presumably there's some process going on within the department about how we can rationalise this, or a wartime or conflict era.
Yes, and part of our defence reform programme has been to say we're going to reform the way in which we do procurement. Because at the moment we've had a one-size-fits-all. It's CADMID for everything. It's concept phase, it's acceptance phase, it's demonstrator phase, it's manufacture, it's in-service, then it's disposal, with lots of assurances and safety tests and everything in between. It can take years. Just to give you an example, the Chancellor said today that the target that we're going to have to get to contract on some of our big platforms is going to go from the average, which is now 6 years, to contract, to 2 years. And that's part of the defence reform that we're undertaking. So we're going to segment the way that we do procurement.
Good.
It's not sensible to try and procure drones that change every 3 months using CADMIN that has an average of 6 years to contract. And so we're going to have 3 layers. We're going to have a top layer that obviously we still have big platforms, like if you're procuring a nuclear submarine, that's going to take you some time. And then a middle tier that will be modular improvements, improved radars, things that can be put into our kit that's better, that's an advance. And then at the lower level, we're going to have pulling through new tech straight into the warfighter's hands. And the target is that we will reduce the average time to contract at that top layer from 6 years to 2 years, the middle layer from 3 years to 1 year, and the bottom layer we want to be able to get to contract in 3 months.
Terrific.
This is a pretty radical change for the MOD.
Yeah. And how are people adjusting to this?
It's going to technically start on the 1st of April. There's a lot of preparatory work has gone in. We know what the structure is. We're changing the whole structure of the way in which the department works. There's going to be, this will all be under the National Armaments Director, and that is being stood up starting 1st of April. And people have reacted very well. Obviously, we have to see how it ends up working, because we've got to implement it and start seeing some results quite quickly. It's quite a big change programme and a cultural change programme. But I don't think any minister in the department would say that they had found any serious objection or people trying to stop it from happening. So I think there's a lot of excitement about it. Obviously, once we're up and running and people can start getting on with changing the way we do things, I think that will be the proof.
And is there anything that needs to be done to increase industrial capabilities in terms of scaling up production, working with partners or startups?
You don't mean in the department, you mean generally in the economy?
Suppliers.
In suppliers. There's a lot already out there, and we don't always know how good some of what there is out there is in the department. The department has frequently left it to our prime contractors to deal with supply chains. And so our information isn't always as good as we might like. Part of the changes that we're making is to engage much more directly with SMEs. And we're changing the way in which we engage with them. At the moment, only about 4% of our spend is with SMEs directly. There's a lot more with SMEs via supply chains from our main contractors in particular contracts. But directly, it's only about 4%. So we've got to get that up. We're establishing an SME hub, which will enable firms and dual tech capabilities who haven't done defence but might have something to offer, will be able to directly engage with us much more clearly and in an obvious way. It's a portal that they can come to. At the moment, we've got over 100 frameworks through which companies are supposed to be able to engage with us. Don't ask me, Chair, to name them all.
You can write to me, don't worry.
Because I wouldn't be able to do it. And if I can't do it, what chance do the small firms have of knowing which one they should be going to? Yep. So we've got to do much better in that sense. And we're also going to be publishing a target for increasing the amount of spend that we have with SMEs by June. You may have also noticed on this that the Chancellor announced that we're establishing UK Defence Innovation.
Did.
And the key to that is, under the National Armaments Director, we will be bringing together, there's a lot of work on innovation going on in different bits of the department. The Army does their innovation stuff, the Navy does their innovation stuff. And individually it's all great, but it's not joined up. And so there isn't particularly a coherent approach to it. There will be with UK defence innovation and with a ring-fenced novel tech budget, which is to increase over time, starting off at £400 million, but increasing over time so that we spend 10% of our equipment budget on novel tech. I mean, I think that is a very exciting change. It provides all kinds of opportunities to SMEs who haven't thought of working for defence before. And it's not going to be easy for us to do because those are ring-fence budgets and targets like that are a challenge. But I think there'll be a lot of excitement in the new reformed MOD, the National Armaments Director Group. This will all be under that, and the National Armaments Director will be accountable for delivering on all of this.
Thank you. Very helpful, thank you. What are the key, I mean, you've got an immense experience of governing. What are the kind of key obstacles that you can foresee as you drive what does indeed sound like quite a bold and radical programme of reform? What are the things that you're kind of most worried about are going to snag in the way?
I think it's probably institutional inertia and people wanting to carry on doing what they've been doing or not knowing how to do things differently. Yeah. Those sorts of cultural changes. I think we need to, there are bound to be issues about empowering people properly to do these things. And just the shift from where they are to where they're going to be in the structure will that's always a challenge, to do the actual transformation and then to get going. But I think one of the really positive things is that this isn't being done in the context of budget challenges. It's being done in the context of there being more money, a really difficult geopolitical situation that makes it tremendously important for us to get this right. And everybody that you meet in the MOD is utterly committed to delivering for the nation and making sure that our warfighters have the kit and equipment that they need. And so I think that sense of public service in the department is going to be tremendously important for us in going through these transformations.
And I think this is the first defence industrial strategy that's been updated or published since the second invasion of Ukraine.
Yes, I mean the last government, their last document was produced in 2021, mm-hmm. and it had some good things in it. Yep. It moved away from worldwide cheapest price competition, which drives a certain kind of behaviour, which isn't always helpful in every instance. But it didn't take into account the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and it's not taken into, obviously, didn't take into account what's happened since. And it wasn't obvious to me, either when I was doing this job in opposition or now, quite how it was implemented. There were some things on spiral development where work was definitely done, but it isn't clear to me what the implementation arrangements were.
This is a big opportunity. Okay, yeah. Thank you. Antonia Bence.
Thank you. And staying with the defence industrial strategy then, when do we think it's going to be published, and will it be after the Strategic Defence Review?
It will be, it's not part of the Strategic Defence Review because, of course, that is being done by external reviewers who have done that. And the Defence Industrial Strategy is an internal document that we're working on. But it will have to tie in with it, and it will therefore probably be published at a similar sort of time. I'm not saying it'll be on the same day, but it's in the same ballpark. So the Prime Minister said the SDR would be published by in the first half of the year, and so I anticipate that the Defence Industrial Strategy will be published in that kind of timescale too.
And, do you think it will give industry clarity on the capabilities that the government wants to onshore? And what would your emerging sense of those capabilities be?
The Strategic Defence Review will set out the threats that we face and the capabilities that we need. And
so there'll be a threat assessment?
There is. In the SDR. I mean, that's if you look at the, which I'm sure you have, Chair, the terms of reference, mm-hmm. that's what one of the big jobs that they were doing. And so
Cabinet Office was refusing to publish one when it comes to economic security. That's why we're so intrigued to see it coming.
well,
But don't let me take you down a rabbit hole.
this is a document that's produced by independent reviewers and in accordance with the terms of reference that they've been given. And one of the things that they've been asked to do is assess the threats that we face and that we ought to be obtaining capability to deal with. The Defence Industrial Strategy is then about how we then do that. Obviously, the previous Defence Industrial and Security Strategy from 2021 had some sovereign capabilities in it. We wouldn't demur against any of those. They all seemed very sensible. There was the nuclear, the crypto. Help me out, Barney.
Nuclear, crypto and offensive cyber were the
Yes.
3 sovereign, and there were 4 for operational independence, which were combat air, complex weapons, maritime, so shipbuilding, and general munitions.
Obviously, so we will be considering, I know that some your previous witnesses have made suggestions about things like batteries and additive manufacturing, and I think energetics. Certainly on the latter, I think we have a long list, if you like, that ended up being 22 long, and we've not got to the stage where we've decided precisely which we think should be included. But we are doing work on what ought to be sovereign, what we ought to have here on shore. You'll be aware, Chair, that we've brought back barrel manufacturing.
Yes.
To
We may as well just pick this up at this stage, because is virgin steel likely to be one of the sovereign capabilities that you think we will need? So we've obviously taken evidence from a number of steel makers, including the chair of the Steel Council, co-chair of the Steel Council, who have given us some pretty categorical evidence. So John Bolton told the committee certain sectors, including defence and rail, still require virgin steel made through blast furnaces. We've taken a fair bit of evidence from others who have made a similar kind of argument. And so this question from Antonia Bance is really important. Do you think you're going to expand the list of sovereign capabilities beyond those that were listed in the initial statement of intent?
we haven't made a decision about that yet. We haven't made a decision about that yet.
You have not?
No.
No, okay.
But we will make a decision ahead of publishing the document, of course. But we are considering what sovereign capabilities ought to be, what they ought to be.
Well, and I mean, this comes to part of the point of having both ministers here on the panel with us today, making sure that the Defence Industrial Strategy contributes to the overall industrial strategy. We're obviously awaiting the steel strategy.
Yes.
So it's becoming an obsession of this committee is the extent to which departments are able to work together on the cross-cutting agendas. And so being able to hear both of you answer on, is the join up where it needs to be between the steel strategy, the defence industrial strategy and the overall industrial strategy, I guess, is the question I'm coming to.
Just talk us through how you both coordinate on this question on what are the capabilities that the country needs, because obviously you've got to worry about the defence industrial strategy. Sarah Jones has got to worry about economic security more broadly. How does HMG come to a shared view about the sovereign capabilities our nation needs in this new era?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of links at official level engaged, because obviously we all know that I'm doing industrial strategy, which is part of DBT's broader industrial strategy, and obviously Sarah is doing the steel strategy. So we do our best to make sure that those tie up. But we're not at the stage yet where ministers have made decisions about all of these things. So most of the links at the moment are at official level, I think it's probably fair to say. Barney?
Yeah, I mean, we are working very closely with both DBT senior officials and senior officials from the other growth-driving sectors to ensure that there are links between the defence sector and the other sector plans. I think one of the things that was in the spring statement text today was the Defence Growth Board, which will be co-chaired by the Chancellor and the Defence Secretary, to ensure that Defence is making an active contribution to the government's growth mission. immediately before this meeting, I was in the sort of the senior official cross-Whitehall meeting on industrial strategy. So there's a very active cross-Whitehall community to bring the different strands of this together.
That's great that it's the Chancellor and the Secretary of State for Defence, but where is the Secretary of State for DBT, I suppose, is the question. So I suppose, Sarah Jones, the question for you is, from a governance point of view, we've got some industrial policy governance that is coming into place. We can see things like the Steel Council. Just help us understand how the Defence Industrial Strategy is governed in a way that connects the two departments, because when we look at questions like economic security, we can see that economic security has been taken into the main hub of the National Security Council, but the National Security Council no longer includes the Secretary of State for the Department of Business and Trade. So just kind of help us with the wiring a little bit and give us some reassurance that it's joined up, so, if you can, and if it's true.
So I would say all these things are always a work in progress, right? And the industrial strategy has these 8 growth driving sectors. One of them is defence. And we have all the other sectors that sort of sit, some of them naturally in the Department of Business and Trade, some of them sit under different departments, DSIT, Life Sciences, for example. You have a kind of a model of different departments owning those different parts of the sector, but the industrial strategy itself is being pulled together with a team of people, including people from all the different government departments in DBT, and you have the Industrial Strategy Council, which is helping us to do that. So there is a structure. Obviously, Number 10, the Treasury, are very much involved in these conversations as well. I'm working really closely with Spencer Livermore, looking at these sectors, looking at each individual one and making sure we're sort of all moving in the same direction. But, you know, it is also the case to say that this mission-driven government that we have is a new way of doing government. We want to work better across departments, and we will keep working to make sure we're doing that. But the industrial strategy has our 8 sectors, and defence is one of those 8, and so we are talking to the Ministry of Defence a lot.
Better just try and understand this now then. So the Defence Industrial Strategy is one of the 8. So it's got some governance that reports into the Industrial Strategy Council.
The Growth Board, the Growth Mission Board.
The Growth Board, excellent. But the group is chaired by the Chancellor and the Secretary of State for MOD.
Defence one.
Yeah.
The new Growth Board.
Chair, if I might just, you might recall that the manifesto that we got elected on had specifically mentioned Defence Industrial Strategy. Mm-hmm. In it, which none of the other sectors had, and so we've been turbo boosted by having that manifesto coverage to make sure that we have our own governance within the department. Yes, it's going to act as a sector plan, and we make sure that we operate with DBT and form part of their broader industrial strategy. But we have our own governance arrangements within MOD to make sure that it gets implemented.
Okay. Let me bring in Matt Weston, but I think what would be terrifically useful is maybe just to give us back an organogram that just kind of helps us understand the interaction of the governance, if that's okay.
I can do that.
Thank you. Matt Weston.
I'll ask you both a slightly more specific question related to this, but it might just help sort of illustrate the possibilities of the strategy, and that is around armoured steel. So I was surprised to learn, for example, that I think it's Sweden and Germany are, I think, the only 2 nations that we tend to source from that we don't actually produce currently. Given that so many nations, not just Europe but globally, are looking at their defence capabilities in this uncertain world, is this not a huge opportunity for us in terms of export?
It's certainly true that there's a lot of nations looking to buy armoured steel vehicles. We don't make armoured steel that's suitable for such vehicles in Britain, and to the extent that we are making armoured vehicles, our prime contractors buy it from elsewhere. Now, we need to make sure that as we're all ramping up defence production across Europe, that we don't just fight each other. We're trying to do it in some sort of coordination. Hence our bilateral arrangements, our multilateral arrangements for procurement within NATO. And obviously we hope that we can have some involvement in the EU. We have some involvement in EU programs, but we hope to be able to tap into SAFE and rearm as well if we can get the appropriate EU defence and security agreement that would enable us to do so. So there's much more effort going into coordination and joint interoperability and joint arrangements to try and procure the kind of kit that we need, and that includes armour.
I'm just concerned, obviously we've heard about the UK losing its virgin steel production capacity, and why this isn't an opportunity for us, perhaps. I don't know if it's possible for such sites to be able to produce armoured steel, but why that wouldn't be, given the UK and its strength in the defence sector, why is that not an opportunity, Minister Jones, maybe?
Yes. I mean, this, I would say, a couple of things which explain why we're doing a steel strategy. The steel sector has not been in a brilliant place over recent years. We've seen the capacity, the production of steel fall, and you got the figures from UK Steel when they gave evidence. Now only about a third of the steel we use in the country is made in the country. So, we want to deliver a steel strategy that sees growth. Now, of course, defence is one part of that. There's lots of different types of steel, lots of sort of specialist steel. All of the different steel makers do slightly different things. Some of them do defence, some of them do other things. I think there is a debate to be had about how we as a country define the importance of steel, whether you're talking about virgin steel making or steel more broadly. There is a reason why Russia bombed all the blast furnaces in Ukraine, pretty much straight away, because countries need steel, not just for defence, but to build the roads and the infrastructure and to rebuild, indeed, after war. So I think we're in a climate where, beyond sort of what you need for defence capability per se, there is a conversation to be had about how important steel is and how important the production of it in this country is, so that should the need arise, we can be producing the right things in the right way. I think there's economic opportunities that come from the increased spending on defence, and of course we want to see as much built in the UK as possible, and we have great expertise, whether it's in Sheffield Forgemasters or Liberty or elsewhere, to do that. But almost just as important is our capability to build the railway tracks and the construction and the all of the other suite of products that we make here in the UK.
Not least because we've just announced £13 billion worth of extra investment in infrastructure, rail, defence. That's quite a big boost for the steel industry, I would have thought.
Yes, and I mean, this is why we need a plan, which we've not had before, that actually looks at, what is the demand, what are the possibilities, what do we not make now? So, there's a lot of debate over floating offshore wind, for example. We don't have the plate mills that build the size of the turbines that perhaps we might want. We need to look at all of the future demand and work out what the possibilities are and see how we can use the levers of government to stimulate that demand.
Okay, so let's just make sure we've really understood this. So, Maria Eagle, you haven't yet come to a view as to whether we need virgin steel making capability in the UK from a defence perspective?
No. Although what I can say, Chair, is that both the MOD and our suppliers procure a tonnage that's less than 1% of the UK's annual raw steel production. So in that sense, the industries that we're talking about in the defence industrial strategy aren't big users of steel.
Yeah. Just wanted to make sure we had that on the record. And Sarah Jones, what's your view on whether that blast furnace capability is needed in the UK today?
So I think, sorry if this is repeating, but I think there is a difference between what is the need for the creation of production of steel in the UK. There are lots of ways to produce steel in the UK using electric arc furnaces, and we're looking at hydrogen production as well. Virgin steel is the steel that you get from blast furnaces, and that's what we would lose with blast furnaces close. If you talk to people like Tata, they say with their electric arc furnace, once they've built that, about 20% of what they will need to add to the scrap will be virgin steel. So I think if you're looking at the suite of what you need in the country in terms of different types of production, there is an argument that you need that, you want that virgin production of steel. So we have commissioned the Materials Processing Institute to do a piece of work which is reporting to us quite soon on exactly that point. The alternative to blast furnaces is something called a DRI, where you use hydrogen, and that is what we are looking at. Do we need that capability in the UK? But we can make things without it. You just need a proportion of what goes into the.
So you've just said there is an argument for keeping virgin steel making capability in the UK.
Yeah, and we are trying to get to the bottom of that demand, because people have different views, say different things. So the Materials Processing Institute will give us an answer in terms of what their best guess is based on all the evidence of what we need.
So does that mean the unanswered question in your mind is merely what capacity we need, or have you decided one way or the other that yes, this is a capability we need in the UK, we're just not sure yet about on what scale?
There is a question on capacity, because the more sophisticated we get with what we can do with scrap, the less need you have for the virgin steel, because if you are able to separate your scrap to such an extent that it is high quality steel, that it produces high quality steel, you need less and less and less of the primary steel. So in America, I'm told they need a much higher proportion of it because their quality of their scrap is not great. Our scrap, we separate things, it's better. So we have, as I said, Tata need about 20% of it for their electric arc furnace, they think. So it's definitely part of the mix. The question is, if you look at it in terms of the economics of it, what we can do in terms of pulling our levers to make sure private companies are providing what we need. If you look at it in terms of security, how do we make sure we can produce steel as a country? Those are the questions that we're hoping to answer through Materials Processing. And the steel strategy will answer that question.
I'm going to try and summarise what I think I've heard you say. We need a virgin steel making capability in the UK. We're not sure how much.
We do need it, yes. And the question is, do we produce it here or do we not?
Minister, can I just ask, when will the Department have established what that total opportunity market is for UK or for export?
When we publish the plan for steel, which we're working with the industry on, we'll have some answers. I mean, I am doing a series of roundtables. We did one yesterday on this topic with the steel producers and the scrap producers, and these are things that we're teasing out, and the Materials Processing Institute are teasing out as well. There's a piece of work about what is the future demand for steel looking like. What is it actually going to be if we take advantage of the opportunities? What should we be shooting for in terms of growth?
Sorry, that plan will be published when?
So in the spring we're going to have, I know the answer to everything is the spring.
Spring has started.
But the steel strategy will be in the spring.
Antonia Batts, did you want to?
No, I will come back.
Alvin Bailey?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister. I think one of the consequences of the mobilisation of industries across Europe will be that the analysis that we'll be doing right now will change, and those impacts will also shift as to where they manifest. So the right honourable member for Liverpool and Garston will know that I keep lobbying her about increasing the number of trains that we have on High Speed 1, because we need those trains to get up to Estonia and Finland and be able to move a large amount of military mass. But the ability for Europe to build trains may be challenged by a number of those manufacturers turning their manufacturing premises towards different industries, and therefore having a knock-on effect on what we should be doing ourselves. Have you made any assessment of what that looks like in terms of our virgin industries?
In terms of what Europe might be doing?
Not to do.
So if the Europeans divert their capacity into producing something else, what kind of opportunity does that open up from? Is that part of your thinking?
Well, I mean, you know, all shift is an opportunity, right, to try and increase production in the UK, trying to get market share of green steel, for example, and become a kind of leader on that front is one example. I mean, the EU is looking very closely in terms of the institution on steel, and they've produced a kind of bit of a strategy which in many ways mirrors a lot of the conversations and the thoughts that we're having. They're in a slightly different place on some issues. They've got a lot more blast furnaces. We have a smaller number, and we're sort of transitioning in a slightly different way. So that there are different, some of the things that they are challenging, that they are faced with are different, and some of their responses are different. But we are certainly both talking to them and watching what they're doing in terms of our plan for steel.
That's part of the problem, isn't it? Is that we have to react to the consequences of it because we're no longer in the room with them.
Yeah, but we are talking to them.
Okay. Rosie Writing.
Thank you. We've discussed the 8 key sectors in the industrial strategy, of which defence, based on the increase in defence spending and the spring statement today, becomes a really important one, not only for the industrial strategy, but also for economic growth. So, Minister Eagle, how are you going to use defence procurement so that we deliver the aims of the industrial strategy?
The whole point of procurement is to try and make sure that we get what we need. The industrial strategy is about meeting the requirements set out in the SDR when it's published about what capabilities we need to invest in. And so the industrial strategy is how we will do that. So procurement, as I've already said, will be segmented in order to enable us to speed up and get what we need faster, depending on what type of thing it is, whether it's a big platform, whether it's upgrading existing kit with new radars or whatever, or whether it's new, fast, innovative tech that needs to be pulled through. So the whole point of the industrial strategy is to try and make sure that we can do better and not waste as much money as we have in the past. The defence reform element is about enabling the department to do procurement better. And the National Armaments Director, there would be much more direct accountabilities between senior people running the department. National Armaments Director, her responsibility will be to make sure that we can obtain the capability that we need and get good value for money, and they will be implementing the Defence Industrial Strategy. So the accountabilities are much clearer, and we'll be able to, instead of just having a department which has different strategies in each of the armed forces with their top-level budgets getting what they're trying to get, setting off, they don't have the money to get 10 years down the road, but they set off on the process. And then, 2 or 3 things happen. They set off on the process, but they don't have the money to finish it, so things get shoved to the right. So you then incur costs because capability that should have been retired has to be kept on, and it's got to be refurbed. So we've got to stop wasting money like that, because and so what I'm hoping to see is that the Defence Industrial Strategy will directly enable us to meet the terms of the requirements that the SDR sets out about the capability that we need, and at the same time will boost economic growth around all the nations and regions of the UK as we see that money spent, because part of the industrial strategy, one of the things we want to focus on is getting more British businesses and jobs involved in doing that for us.
So let me just check. So when the Defence Industrial Strategy is published, will you have economy-facing targets or goals that help deliver the broader growth mission? So things like increasing, real wages, rebalancing the economy regionally.
There will be goals and and targets that because part of implementing the industrial strategy will be us needing to know what counts as implementation. So there will be targets, and
will any of them be economic growth targets?
We haven't decided what they are yet, Chair, but I dare say that's going to come into it. And I know that the Defence Secretary Chancellor of the Exchequer on the Growth Board will be interested in making sure that we're delivering economic growth. And they will be overseeing, it'll be one of the arrangements for overseeing the implementation of the Defence Industrial Strategy.
Rosie Writing.
Thank you. Your answers lead me on nicely to my next couple of questions. So the Public Accounts Committee says the combined delay for defence equipment programmes is 21 years. In the reforms that you've set out for us today and changes that you're making in your department, are you confident we will never be in this position again?
We've got to avoid being in that position again, absolutely. And part of the problem has been not only extremely long-term procurement processes that take years, but because there hasn't been centralised and focused, driven by strategy, focused intent, you've got different budget holders saying, oh, well, we'd like some new tanks if you're the army, or we'd like some new ships if you're the navy. And none of it's been joined up. And then the processes have been so long that everybody sets off trying to get into the CA bit of CABMID, trying to further a project. And we can't do that any longer. And that's why we're segmenting procurement. That's why the National Armaments Director will be directly accountable for delivering. And we have new constraints, some of which were announced today. 10% of our budget is going to have to be spent on new tech, on novel technology. And some of our procurement is going to have to be turned over in 3 months to contract, not hanging on for years. Drones would be the obvious thing that we might be procuring in that manner. And so things will definitely be different. So I think I can say we're not going to be in that position.
Are you going to segment procurement spend between fast lane, middle lane and slow lane?
I wouldn't describe them as fast, middle and slow, but
I'm summarising.
Yes, is the answer to that, yes.
Okay, and you don't know what the balance is between those lanes
I
at this
don't
stage?
yet.
No, okay.
And that what you've laid out is evidence also that we've heard on this committee from defence primes about they're crying out for multi-year certainty and spending programmes if they're going to scale up. Will the defence strategy deliver this?
I think they cry out for certainty, and they cry out for some understanding of what we want. I think that a bit
sharper than that. So
yes.
we've heard evidence from people making some pretty significant bits of kit for the military who don't have a contract for next year, although the financial year is almost upon them. And so what they're asking for, if they want to make significant investments in, e.g. building new shipyards, then actually having multi-year certainty is really important, particularly if we're going to start looking at things like novel infrastructure, like defence banks, for example. Unless we de-risk the procurement over many years, we're not going to be able to lever in the private investment that perhaps we need.
And also we heard evidence from businesses that are concerned about skills, and they feel they need to start investing now in people to get the skills for the next few years. So that's, I think, another reason they're crying out for continuity.
I think the long-term partnerships and contracts, you might have seen the Unity contract that we signed that with Rolls-Royce that gives a multi-year certainty about us procuring on the nuclear side. In a way that enabled them then to establish an academy to start thinking about how can we make sure we've got the right skills to do this over a number of years in Derby. And we're trying to increasingly do longer term partnerships with our really important suppliers in that way. The point that I was making about another kind of certainty is it's not just on a contract-by-contract basis. We're seeing a multi-year increase in defence spending over the next 5 to 10 years. That gives the certainty that ought to give comfort to some of our big suppliers that they should invest, that they themselves should invest. We want to see a partnership where it's not just about public money, but other types of money coming in, or whether it's primes themselves investing because they can see the opportunities, they can see they can sometimes be quite risk averse, about the point at which they will accept that they're going to get some contracts. Now, I understand in the past we've had boom and bust cycles that have led them to feel like that. I don't think we're in that position now. I think we're in a position where there's a steady upward increase in defence spending that they can see. That there's a reform in the way in which we do procurement that ought to give them more certainty. We want to promote longer-term partnerships with some of our big suppliers to make sure that at an early stage we can have a joint understanding of where it is that we're going. And I think that will help.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Gavin Bailey.
Thank you. Just wanted to kind of join up. So, Honourable Friend was made reference to the equipment plan. We haven't seen an equipment plan since 2023, and therefore this committee will struggle to be able to make any assessments of the affordability of that plan. And so, Minister, would it be possible first for you to comment on any parliamentary committee's ability to scrutinise the programme and affordability?
We didn't want to produce an equipment plan this year before we've got the strategic defence review that sets out what capability it is that we need. But we are committed to having increased transparency with parliamentary colleagues. On Public Accounts Committee, obviously very interested in this as well. And so we will have an arrangement that from this coming year that we're not trying to hide what's been revealed in the past. We just didn't want to produce one in a year when we didn't have our strategic defence review published, and it's clear that we're changing the way we do things, so we weren't sure how useful it would have been. But this isn't an indication that we want to avoid scrutiny of parliamentary colleagues' scrutiny. We definitely don't. So we will be producing something similar that will enable colleagues to see where we're at.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. You've already highlighted that only 4% of contracts are going to SMEs at the moment. Can you detail what support that the strategy that you're going to offer to SMEs, particularly in regions like the Black Country, where there's a strong manufacturing heritage, but there's historically limited access to major defence contracts, and just maybe flesh out what these SME hubs will look like?
Just first of all, on access at the moment, it's almost impossible for a small and medium-sized enterprise to decide it wants to try and get a defence contract, partly because it's hard for them to know who to contact at the moment. A lot of our contracting arrangements require quite significant weights and producing documentation that can be very expensive to produce, and then you don't hear straight away whether or not you've won a contract. And so there are a lot of barriers at the moment to SMEs from being able to know if they can do anything for us, or to think, well, we'd like to, but we don't know how to go about it. So the hubs are the SME hub is it's not designed, it's not fully designed yet, but the intention is to have a one-stop shop that a small, medium-sized enterprise that thinks it might have something or wants to do work for defence can contact, that will then be able to signpost them to some other initiatives within defence. Like, for example, we're now about to have the UK Defence Innovation Centre that's going to have budget, that's going to be doing work to try and get new tech or dual tech involved in contracting. And so I think it'll be that kind of arrangement that will make it much easier and more practical for an SME to do work for us, or for us to find a company that might do something else in another field that has dual use. So I hope that it will be much easier. We're also, when we establish a Defence Industrial Joint Council, we will have representation from SMEs on it, and we will have trade organisations from SMEs and tech, so Make UK, Tech UK, and as well as ADS will be on it. And in the past, what it's replacing the defence suppliers forum was all primes, really, and so there was no direct input. No place at which SMEs or representatives of SMEs could grab hold of ministers or officials and say, what about the SMEs? That is going to change. And so I hope that it will be much easier for smaller companies to be able to contract with us, and we'll be held to account for it, and because we'll have a target to be published in June for increased direct spend. I mean, obviously the other way in which SMEs can get involved with us is via in prime supply chains, and for some that works better than trying to be directly involved. Obviously that will still be there.
Okay. Let me just bring in Alison Griffiths at this point, because there's one particular point about innovation we need to come to.
Please.
Thank you, Minister. I suppose the first thing I just wanted to ask about what you've already said was to be a bit more specific on timing. You also mentioned targets, and it'd be really interesting to get some more specificity. I can't get the word out. Specificity, thank you. On those targets too. You also mentioned the catapults, the UK Research and Innovation Council. Could you be, again, more specific about exactly how you see your department working with that to build up that ecosystem? So it's really just to get some good generalities that we've had so far, but if we could be more specific, please.
UK Defence Innovation, its establishment has been announced not for that long, in the last 3 weeks, and a bit more detail about it today in the spring statement about the budgets that it will have and what its aim is. It will sit under the NAD in the NAD group of the department in defence reform, and as I've said, that's being stood up on the 1st of April. So we're at the beginning of this process. The £400 million that is a ring-fence budget is for this year. It's 25-26. And the promise is that will increase over time. And so we're going to have to get a move on in terms of making sure that we use that money and engage, therefore, with smaller firms that might have innovative products that we can pull through. So it's going to be a challenge. It's not going to just disappear for a few years. We're going to get started quite quickly in this financial year, and then try and build on it.
Okay, thank you.
So, just to make sure we're really clear about this, the evidence we've taken from drone manufacturers, for example, has given us a good picture of the ecosystem that connects UKRI delivering research grants, high-value catapults, which may be getting money from, e.g., a university, the Defence and Security Accelerator. People have got good things to say about being able to get contracts from these organisations because it helps them raise, for example, equity finance. Yes. But I'm frankly now just a little bit confused about how the UK Defence Innovation is going to sit together with all of these other pieces in the puzzle. So again, don't feel the need to kind of go into too much detail now, but we would really appreciate just a bit of an organogram that helps us understand how these things are.
I mean, I'll try and find out if we've got an organogram on that, but and let you have it.
Or draw your own.
Or
tell us
draw
how
my
it works
own.
in practice.
Dangerous if ministers start.
Yeah, you can give us the Mirror Eagle
organogram
version if you want.
But I mean, DASA does great work, and the UK Defence Innovation isn't going to replace DASA. DASA will still be part of the ecosystem. But UK Defence Innovation is going to bring together some of the initiatives that there are already across defence in a more coherent way.
We're worried about lots of different front doors
yes.
that make it really complicated and raise the transaction costs for small innovative firms that are just trying to help the country.
Well, I'm hoping that the hub will be able to signpost anybody, any small
That's when
firm.
you know it's really complicated, when you need a hub and a signpost.
I mean, I go from where we have to do this from where we've started off, which is 108 frameworks and 4% spending only on direct spending on small firms, and I want to improve that.
I
think a hub will improve that.
Help us understand and draw us a picture. John Cooper.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Chair. So obviously Europe is also gearing up. There's no doubt about that. And Germany and the EU have changed the rules so they can access more finance for defence spending. Do you have any sense of where we are compared to them? What are they likely to ramp up to? Do we have any sense of that? And also, crucially, do you think that that money can be spent in the UK? Will those countries be able to access our products? There seems to be some confusion about this. There's some suggestion as well that France is trying to tie defence spending into things like fishing and things like that, which seems to use a nautical phrase, muddy the waters a bit.
Well, I mean, we have to see. There's a big meeting on the 19th of May. We're hoping that we'll be able to try and sort out the UK, the EU, the UK EU defence and security arrangements that would then hopefully give us access to rearm and SAFE. We have good bilateral defence arrangements as well as arrangements through NATO, which mean that we already can and do cooperate across national boundaries within Europe on specific programmes. The Trinity House Agreement has 4 lighthouse projects, which enables Germany and the UK to develop jointly defence capabilities that we've focused on. The Lancaster House Agreement with France has projects, again, that are cooperative, which would not only benefit NATO and France and the UK, or NATO and Germany and the UK, but give us export potential jointly as well. And so there's a lot going on bilaterally already. There's a lot going on under NATO umbrella already. I think that the rearm and SAFE is something that it would be sensible for British industry to be able to be a part of.
Your confidence level in us getting a deal to help us access that?
Well, I'm very hopeful.
Okay. Mr. Cooper.
Again, there's been maybe speculation only, but there are a lot of suggestions that this is tied to achieving a security and defence partnership with the EU. Can you give us any sense of where we are with that? Are there challenges to that? Are we well down the line to achieving that partnership? And also, this obviously has got big implications. You touched on it yourself there. We have a lot of companies who already have one foot on either side of the channel, if you like. So you've got companies like, for instance, Leonardo and Thales, who ultimately have got big elements in the UK, but they are ultimately foreign countries. They're headquartered in foreign countries, let's put it that way. So France and obviously Italy for those two. Where are we with that? Signing some kind of formal deal? Is that in the offing?
It's in the offing, but it's not finished yet.
Do you see challenges? How is it going? Can you give us any sense of where we're at? I mean, obviously.
Well, as I said, I'm hopeful.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Rosie Brighting.
A quick question for both of you. Which department do you think is best placed to lead on defence exports? I'll start with Minister Jones.
So I think, as we were talking earlier about industrial strategy and how we're sort of trying to make sure we're working across government, the kind of problem that we need to solve is making sure different departments are working well together. So where it sits is one question to which I don't have an answer, because it's not my job to do that. There are Secretaries of State who make those decisions about what sits where. But I think what is important is that however we are structured, we're working really closely together. The sort of dual importance of the first priority is to keep us safe, the first priority for government, and then the first mission for government is to grow the economy. These two things need to work together. The world is in a different place than it was, so we need to make sure we get these things right. Obviously, there's huge expertise in the Department of Business and Trade on exports. There's huge expertise in the Department of Defence of all the things that the department does and knows that it needs. So we need to make sure we're working together.
Do you think whilst working together there should be a department that leads on it, or do you think it should be?
As I say, the structure of it is not for me to comment on. What I see through developing the industrial strategy is that we need to do better at working together across departments in all kinds of different ways. If you look at specific industries like space, you know, there's a bit in the Department for Transport, there's a bit in DCIT, there's a bit in DBT, and there's a bit in Defence. We need to be more coherent on the way we operate, and I think the same is true with the need we have now, not just to buy kit because we need it to keep us safe, but where we buy it from is really important too, and these things need to be combined.
Maria Regal?
There's no... I mean, the machinery of government changes are for the Prime Minister. I don't think there's any perfect machinery of government arrangement. There's lots of cross-departmental working in many areas. I think we do work pretty closely together. The UK Defence and Security Exports team in DBT, if I go on export campaigns abroad, they come with me. And so it's not as if we're completely siloed and separate. I think there is an issue about with government-to-government offers, and defence, that's increasingly what is wanted when we're trying to sell. They want government-to-government. And so I do think there's some work that we can do on improving that, because everyone we do at the moment is bespoke, whereas some of our rivals in trying to export equipment, they have ready-made arrangement. And so I mean, I think there's work that we can do to improve up our game on export efforts. But wherever the UK Defence and Security Exports teams sit, we do work very closely together.
When you're putting together those government-to-government offers, I mean, which department often has the prizes that you need to add into the mix? Which other bits of government do you generally need to come and help you deliver a government-to-government offer?
I mean, most of the ones that I come across, because it's defence equipment, the nations we're trying to do deals with, they want an arrangement with defence. But I suppose that's natural. But we do pull in from particularly DBT and on export finance.
Yeah, really briefly.
Sorry, I'll probably come in on Rosie's next question actually, because I wonder where she's going. Space is probably a good example of why a disparate organisation or not having a specific lead is a problem, because there are particular challenges. The big driver is perhaps defence, and yet we cohere it outside of defence, and a lot of the inhibitors to our space exports or to the industry itself within the UK reside in DFT and in other departments where we create significant blockers. So it's a bit of a challenge there that, maybe a perfidious approach is not the right one.
Yeah, all these things are challenging. If you talk to, the proliferation of small companies that are working in the space, access to finance is another one, and that's a problem across, a lot of different sectors with smaller businesses as well, but space in particular because of the just accessing investment, and so we need to help them do that as well. So that all these things will always be quite complicated, because these there is a lot of different elements where we have to have interventions. You've got to have the rules of the road in space, and that has to be set, and regulation has all of these things have to come together. I think my observation from doing the industrial strategy more widely than the steel strategy is, we can do these things slicker and better, both for companies that are engaging with government and for the way government does business, and that's what we're trying to design.
It's just the one department we haven't there that should be the biggest driver is the FCDO.
Well, I mean, we work with defence attaches all the time in our export campaigns. So we do what we can to cohere across governments, and as Minister of State level, we work with what we've got, and the Prime Minister decides on the machinery of government.
Yes.
Okay. Just ahead of our visit to Japan next week, Rosie Bryson?
Yes, Minister Eagle, who should lead the export drive work for GCAP Tempest?
Well, I mean, all three nations are working on it. We've got to, we've got to design it and build it to start with. But we're working at an early stage. All three nations are committed to doing that work. And we've all got different contacts.
Which department do you think?
I mean, it would be, as long as the machinery of government is as it is, we'd be working as we are now. I mean, I do a lot of export drives for combat air. It's not GCAP yet, but it's combat air, Typhoon.
Currently, combat air campaigns are led out of the Ministry of Defence.
Some combat air campaigns.
Okay, thank you. Just very briefly, Mr. Bailey.
And it's just important to note that the RAF has a specific relationship with Typhoon, which is different to your relationships with F-35. So it becomes more disparate. If you could just offer some comment on that.
Yeah, so sorry, explicitly with Typhoon, I think if we're talking about supporting an F-35 campaign would be led by the US, and Gripen, where there's UK content, would clearly be led by Sweden. But where it's a UK capability, it's led by the Ministry of Defence at the moment.
Very helpful. Right. Thank you very much. Let's just move on to events next week. So when it comes to what may or may not happen on Liberation Day, as I think the President in the United States is calling it, do we have any sense at this stage, Sarah Jones, of whether the UK is going to be hit by tariffs or not?
So, as you say, next Wednesday is the 2nd of April, and that's the World Tariff Day, as the US are calling it. And that comes after, of course, the tariffs that have already gone on to steel and aluminium that you talked to colleagues about last week. This will be the reciprocal tariffs that has been talked about. I think because of the strength of the conversations and relationships between the Prime Minister and the President, we are in a position where we are in dialogue with the US about what may or may not happen. We don't yet have a detailed proposal in terms of what they may or may not do, both in terms of the proportion of the tariffs and what they might be put on. But we are having good conversations with our American colleagues. Johnny Reynolds was in America last week, spoke, of course, with his counterparts there, and those conversations are ongoing. And I'd have to not give any more information as the committee would understand in terms of the nature of those conversations, but they are ongoing.
When we took evidence from steelmakers last week, which I know you listened into, none of them had a good word to say. As I go back to the transcript, about the Trade Remedy Authority and the speed with which it was acting to stand up new safeguards against diverted steel from China. When are we going to see some proposals from the Trade Remedy Authority? Have you got them already?
So they have announced today, which is helpful, that they are going to widen their review of the UK steel defences, and that is directly in response to the request that UK Steel talked about putting in when they met with you last week, and we are pleased about that. They are basically expanding their scope of steel safeguard measures, certain types of steel that, certain categories. So they have announced that, and they will, I hope, report soon on the outcomes of that. And of course, Douglas Alexander, my colleague, is looking to make sure our defence mechanisms are as strong as they can possibly be.
We heard a clear call from steelmakers that we need to not merely review but to implement these safeguards on the same time frame as the European Union. Are we going to hit that time frame?
So they've announced today they're doing the piece of work. What the EU have announced is a suite of different things, some of which are similar in terms of time frame to us, because there's two questions. There's the immediate, are the safeguards in place now adequate? That's what the TRA are now looking at. The second question is what happens when we reach the end of the safeguards in 2026?
Yeah.
And the EU and ourselves are both looking at that.
But are we going to
come forward.
But as a nation, are we going to get safeguards in place at the same time as the European Union or not?
I don't know if we will bring in exactly the same things at exactly the same time. Okay. Our priority is the conversations we're having with the American government to make sure, we are as successful as we can be in those conversations. The TRA have announced they are doing the review, which is right, and we support that. Douglas Alexander is working on, all the options in terms of what we need in terms of safeguards.
But
nothing is out of the question.
But at this stage, we've got no timeline.
At this stage, the TRA are doing their piece of work, and we are working with the Americans to see if we can come to a conclusion.
What has the TRA said to you about when they're going to deliver their review conclusions?
They haven't said. I'm hoping we'll see it before the summer.
Gosh, so there could be, in that case, a 3-month gap between the EU putting in their safeguards and the UK putting in
I mean, the EU is in a very different position, and we don't yet know at all what is actually going to happen next week. So we will respond and make sure we do what's right for our industries, because that's our job. And at the moment, we will make sure we're both reviewing the measures that are already in place, but also prioritising talking to the Americans, because we want we want free trade. We also have an active state. We have a different approach from the previous government. So we're developing the industrial strategy, the steel strategy, to try and make us as strong as possible in terms of our economy, whilst working with our colleagues.
In your view, then, is the TRA working fast enough, or does it need to go faster?
I think I'm pleased that they've responded quickly to what UK Steel have asked them to do.
Given what you've heard from steelmakers, do you think it needs to go faster?
I think it's not really a question of how fast for me. I think that Minister Alexander is definitely looking at all of these issues, making sure these things are as strong as they can be. I'm talking as is he's meeting with the UK Steel tomorrow and Community Union to make sure we're completely aligned on what they need. I'm interested in making sure, as they said, there's the immediate problem of tariffs in America. The wider problem is the knock-on impact that has. And of course, that's something we need to deal with. And the quantity of steel in the world that is produced by China and the impact of that, these things are all issues that affect our steel industry. And we need to make sure we're doing what we can within the law to protect them.
Matt Weston.
Mr. Jones, we were talking earlier about the plan for steel, and what, in your view, what is the government's view, and the market, are the greatest opportunities for UK steel in the future?
So I think, the first thing to say is we have some brilliant expertise in the country in terms of the workers who work in steel, which pays higher than local wages by some margin as well. And so we have the expertise that we need to draw on. Secondly, we haven't sort of taken a look back, I think, for steel for a while. The previous government's approach was to sort of intervene when things were getting to the point of government intervention needed to happen to stop things from shutting, as opposed to what's the proactive work we can do. So if you look at the suite of steel that we produce in the country, we have a good diverse range, but we could be doing more. You asked the people giving evidence last week what more we could be doing, whether it's in construction or automotive or whatever it might be. So we are looking at, do we need primary production, is a kind of technical question that we're trying to ask, but what are the future markets, what is the demand, and how do we stimulate that demand, whether that's from procurement or otherwise. What do we need to do with our scrap industry, which is going to be absolutely central to the future of our steel industry. How do we build in R&D, because there's a lot of good technology and research and development that happens, but we need to do more. Trade and overcapacity is a big important part of the picture, and that's what we're looking at, as are energy prices, of course, and carbon leakage. So this whole package, if we can get this right, we think we can develop the steel industry in the UK in a number of different ways. The kind of obvious one is the floating offshore wind, because that's the one everyone points to where we're not producing in that space at the moment. So does that mean we need a plate mill? Does that mean we need a DRI? What do we spend this very significant amount of money, particularly in this economic climate that we have, there's £2.5 billion, how do we spend that well? And those are all the things we're trying to pull together in the steel strategy.
So the plan will identify those sectors, and it is setting out a horizon until when? It's a plan for steel in the UK over what period?
It's a kind of, what's the next 10-year trajectory look like? What can we do? Obviously, you'd like to think we're setting up a plan for the longer term, but I think just having something that gives us that line of sight going forward, there's no, in the main, these are private companies making choices about where they invest their money. So it's our job to sort of see if we can create a climate in the UK where it's an attractive place to invest. In the same way that we want to do across all the different sectors that we're looking at in the industrial strategy. But steel, I think, has a particularly important role as a foundational industry for the country. So as well as growth, I think it is important from a foundational and security point of view as well.
Couldn't agree more. Just slightly surprised, if I may say, about the horizon being just 10 years. One of the points that came out of the sessions we had with the steel producers, and this will come as no surprise, was that they have one issue, and it is the price of energy. The 2.5 billion that the government has earmarked to support the sector, how do you think that should best be spent, and what assistance can be given drive down the energy costs to make UK, not just in steel, but competitive across manufacturing?
Yeah, well, as you know, it's energy prices is an issue that comes up across lots of different industries, not just steel, but obviously as an energy-intensive industry, it's particularly important to them. So there are currently sort of two mechanisms through which they get support. One is that energy-intensive industries get some of the policy costs taken off their bill, and they also get the supercharger, which from April is going up to 60% of network costs. So there is support there, and the EU in their steel strategy that they've published recently is putting in place something similar as well. But of course we need to do more than that, and in the long term the way we bring our bills down, we know, is to make sure we're energy secure as a country. That is our strategy that is being pushed through at pace with DESNZ. But of course we're having these conversations. In terms of what we do with the 2.5 billion, I don't have an answer at this point. We need to make sure we spend it well. We need to make sure it's spent in a way that delivers growth and not just manages the kind of existing situation. So we need to look at what kinds of funds are needed. And in addition to that, of course, there's the wealth of other vehicles and levers that government have, whether that's the National Wealth Fund or UK Export Finance. All of these things need to be part of the answer as well.
The 2.5 billion, you're going to basically decide how you're going to spend that as part of the steel strategy when that's published, is that correct? Okay. And so what assurances can you both give to the committee that you are working together in a way that is joined at the hip to ensure that we're maximising the opportunities of defence procurement to drive demand into UK steelmakers? Maria Regal.
Well, we already encourage our suppliers to use UK steel if it's available. Not all of the types of steel that they need are available. And so that's what we do at present. But a lot of the contracts that we have at the moment, they're legacy contracts that were signed many years ago, that were based on pretty hands-off, worldwide competition, cheapest price. And so in that sense, that we request, but I don't know of any arrangements where we require our contractors.
Presumably, if you're producing a long-term equipment plan, it's much easier for you, Sarah Jones, to look at the equipment plan and say to UK steelmakers, well, look, here's the runway of opportunities for UK steelmakers to pitch in. We were very surprised when British Aerospace, for example, told us that no UK steelmakers bid to supply the steel for the new warships that they're building.
Yes, I mean, I think one of the issues there is the type of steel that they use to build warships isn't generally produced in the UK. It's a particularly thin type of steel that isn't produced in the UK. And we, as I've said, we encourage, but we don't have contractual requirements. We encourage our contractors, our primes to source in the UK if they can.
So, Jones, presumably you would prefer there to be contractual requirements for UK steel?
Well, I mean, I think what industry would want is a kind of line of sight on what's coming down the road. The department has a sort of line that produces a sort of line of sight, as it were, in terms of public procurement for steel. It's not perfect, but it's it's useful. And I think through the industrial strategy, we want to be able to do that. There are things in the UK that we do not make at the moment that we would like to make, and there are opportunities for growth if we can get this right. Obviously, Sheffield Forge Masters is a good example of where it's working, but is in a different sort of ownership structure to the others. So as much working together and as much line of sight and as much opportunities, in the same way that Maria was talking about SMEs, you know, the same applies for industry more widely that might want to be interested in the opportunities that this growth in defence spending brings.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I've done roundtables with my steel manufacturers in Dudley, and time again they say they're getting flooded. The UK is being flooded by cheap steel from other countries, and it's making the UK steel uncompetitive. How do we tackle that?
Yeah. So, I mean, it speaks to what we were talking about earlier. You're absolutely right. I mean, the numbers of in terms of Chinese steel is kind of very high. So there are already sort of anti-dumping measures. There's 17 of them. I think 11 apply to China. Certain, you know, when you bring in more than a certain amount, the CBAM is being introduced in 2027. So that is going to be an important way that we sort of protect our industry who are producing green steel from steel that isn't green coming into the UK. But it's the biggest challenge that we face, and it's not helped by the tariffs that are now being imposed by the US. So we need to look at this. This is why the TRA is why they're looking at, you know, what are the safeguards in place? Do we need to change them now? And then what do we do post 2026 when the current safeguards come to an end? So we're looking at, you know, I can't go into the detail of all the different options that we're going into, but you know, basically we are doing what we will need to do to make sure we can have a competitive market.
We keep scrap metal here in the UK, and what do you think we can do to?
Well, oh my gosh,
that?
So this is another really long. I'll have very happily come back and have a whole session on scrap. I was with the scrap industry yesterday. I was in Celsa looking at their electric arc furnace, which is extraordinary. I mean, they just are extraordinary things, and scrap. And what the scrap industry say is, we sell our scrap. We don't need. The demand isn't here for all of it at the moment, so we sell it abroad. There are issues that we need to look at about what the incentives are. So when you're in Celsa and you see the different types of scrap that they've got, you basically reduce all the scrap and take out all the bits of rubber and rubbish, and then you have to burn them. It costs the scrap companies money to burn that. So the incentive is for them to just sell it as it is abroad. So there are some incentives there that we need to look at, have conversations with DEFRA and others. But we have the scrap here. If we had more electric arc furnaces, we could buy more of the scrap, and that could happen. And there is increasing work together with scrap companies and the increasing number of electric arc furnaces that we've got. But scrap is a very beautiful thing. I'm learning.
Okay. I'm slightly against this, so finally we're going to go to John Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. Looking specifically at British Steel, how close are you to reaching a deal with them? Is there any news on that?
So we offered British Steel, we made an offer to British Steel on Monday, and they have rejected that offer, and we are still in talks with them at the moment.
Those talks are ongoing then?
Yes.
Okay, and again, no clue on, you don't have a deadline on that, you're not putting a guillotine on it, it's open-ended, is it?
We don't have a deadline on it, no.
Okay.
No.
And then how feasible is it to keep the blast furnaces going in the interim period? I mean, I know it's not easy, and if you shut them down, then it's very difficult to restart. Are they likely to keep going?
Our preference would be for the blast furnaces to keep going until, at the least, there is. They have secured the steel to come into the country to keep all of the mills going. So in Port Talbot, the blast furnaces closed, but there is steel coming in that can keep everything else operating. So our preference would be that steel was secured before they would close the blast furnaces.
Okay, but the door is still open. You're still talking to British Steel.
We are still very much talking to British Steel every day. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Finally, then, I suppose the question for you both is: given that you're on the cusp of finalising some quite important strategies, what is the advice, what is the input that you would most like from this committee, Maria Regal? What are the questions that you would really like to solicit our advice on?
And we have welcomed contributions from anybody who would like to contribute. And so I guess that the expertise that the committee has will benefit our thinking as we go forward to try and create the industrial strategy. We've very much focused on defence. So if you have insights that go beyond that, that might be helpful to us, you think that might be helpful to us, we would certainly welcome that.
Okay, Sarah Jones, apart from us obviously calling for much lower energy costs, and what else would you like?
Well, and I think we're going to need a bit of advice on all of the strategies that are being delivered in spring and how we're going to communicate these, because there's an increasing number of things coming out in the spring that will all be very significant. I think, I welcome what you're doing, and I appreciated hearing, the evidence that you've taken from colleagues, and I think that's very useful in and of itself. I think the questions about capability, sovereign capability, are really interesting, and if you draw some conclusions on that would certainly help us. We are thinking about the steel strategy, as you know, very deeply, and working with industry and the trade unions on it, and just your thoughts on the different aspects of that, whether that's on the trade international side or indeed how we grow our capacity here in the UK, then all of that would be very welcome.
Well, look, that's been an extremely helpful session. Thank you very much for making the time today on what has been an extremely busy day in the parliamentary calendar, and thank you to your officials for all the preparation that has gone into today too. We are really grateful to you all for that, and we will be writing back to you in the next couple of weeks on the respective strategies that you are stewarding. But for now, that concludes this panel, that concludes this session.